After my wife's funeral, I went to my brother's son's first birthday party, and he announced, "My son is your wife's child. So as inheritance, I'll take half of your $20 million estate." He even showed me his DNA result. I said, "Oh, I see," and tried to hold back my laughter. Because after my wife's funeral, the last thing I expected was cake, balloons, and betrayal. But apparently, the universe wanted to keep the entertainment subscription active. 3 months after burying Nora, I was still walking around like an emotionally bankrupt zombie with a tie when my brother Julian texted me, "You coming to Leo's first birthday, bro? Keep it low key this time." Low key, he said. The man once rented a llama for his gender reveal. I almost didn't go. I mean, what do you wear to your nephew's party when your grief still fits tighter than your suit? But guilt's a stubborn roommate. It never shuts up. So I showed up, cake in one hand, a forced smile in the other. The house was already filled with the chaos of screaming toddlers, tipsy moms, and relatives pretending to love each other. It smelled like frosting, regret, and baby wipes. Julian spotted me from across the room. He was wearing a bright white shirt, probably to convince people he was pure of heart. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. "Elias," he shouted like we were long-lost war buddies instead of brothers who hadn't spoken since the funeral. He hugged me with that fake enthusiasm reserved for politicians and people with secrets. "Glad you made it," he said, clinking his beer to my elbow because my hands were full. "You've been, what, off the grid?" "Yeah," I said flatly. "Grieving. Remember her? My wife?" He gave an awkward laugh, like empathy was a foreign language he was still learning. Right, Nora. Great woman. Tragic. I looked around the room to avoid punching him. His wife Tessa was fluttering about in a glittery dress, juggling baby wipes and passive-aggressive compliments. Their baby Leo sat in a high chair wearing a tiny crown that read "Birthday King." Fitting, considering Julian had always acted like he was born into royalty instead of overdraft fees. "Make yourself comfortable," Julian said, patting my shoulder. "We'll cut the cake soon. Big moment coming up." He said it with that tone. The kind of tone people use right before telling you they crashed your car or joined a pyramid scheme. Half an hour later, I found myself sitting near the dessert table, nursing a cup of flat soda, pretending not to exist. Then it happened. Julian tapped a spoon against his champagne glass. Clink, clink, clink. Everyone turned toward him, expecting some cheesy toast about fatherhood or blessings. Nope. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "I have an announcement. A big one." My stomach dropped. My brain whispered, "Don't do it, Julian." But my brother has the self-awareness of a potato. He raised his glass high and said, "My son, Leo, isn't just my son. He's also Nora's child." The room went silent, like horror movie silent. Someone's phone chimed with a Baby Shark ringtone, and I swear it sounded like a funeral march. My mother gasped and crossed herself so fast I thought she'd start a fire. My dad blinked like someone had rebooted him. Even the toddler stopped smashing cake long enough to stare. I blinked once, twice. "I'm sorry, what?" Julian smiled proudly, like he'd just cured cancer. "Yes, Nora, your late wife, donated her eggs to help us conceive. So technically, Leo's part of her legacy, and as her husband, that makes you kind of family in a new way." "Kind of family?" I repeated slowly, trying not to laugh. "Julian, we already share DNA, not a therapy group." He chuckled awkwardly and pulled out an envelope like some villain unveiling his master plan. "Oh, there's more. Here are the DNA results to prove it." He handed the papers to our mother, who squinted at them like they were written in hieroglyphics. "What am I looking at?" she asked. "A 50 match," Julian said proudly, "between Nora and Leo. Scientific proof that her genetic material lives on in him. So, considering that, I think it's fair to discuss inheritance matters. I mean, Leo deserves part of Nora's estate, right? Technically, that's part of Elias's 20 million. Now, listen, I've had bad days. I've had clients sue me, I've had my car keyed, I've even had a raccoon break into my kitchen once, but this was next level insanity. Someone dropped a cupcake. My cousin whispered, "Oh, hell no." My mother started muttering prayers in Latin like she was performing an exorcism. And me, I just stood there, holding my soda, trying not to burst out laughing. 20 million? I said, pretending to calculate. Half of that would be 10. You want $10 million because you think my dead wife moonlighted as your fertility donor? He nodded earnestly. Exactly. Julian, I said, deadpan, you've officially outstupided yourself. He frowned. This isn't a joke, Elias. It's documented science. Documented science? I echoed. You mean the papers you printed from Google? I got them from a private clinic, he insisted, puffing up his chest. Really? Which one? The same clinic that once told Mom she was part mermaid? That got a laugh from someone in the back, which only made Julian angrier. You think this is funny? He snapped. Oh, I do, I said. I'm just not sure whether to laugh or call the FBI. He slammed the papers down on the cake table, smearing frosting all over them. You're not taking this seriously. Nora wanted her genes to live on. I tilted my head, pretending to think. Did she tell you that before or after she was dead? He went red. She told me years ago. We talked about it privately. Right, I said. And I'm guessing the Easter Bunny was there too? Tessa finally stepped in, her face pale. Julian, maybe this isn't the right time. No, he barked. He needs to accept the truth. Nora's DNA is in my son. That means Leo deserves something. Something about the way he said deserves made my blood boil. He wasn't doing this for his kid. He was doing it for himself. The man who'd borrowed money from me for business ventures that usually ended in credit card debt and bar tabs. I took a slow sip of my soda. You're right, I said finally. Leo does deserve something, like parents who aren't insane. A ripple of laughter spread across the room. My mother whispered, Jesus, take the wheel. Julian's jaw tightened. You think you're better than me because you married a genius. No, I said calmly. I know I'm better than you because I can spell genius. His face twisted. She loved me, Elias. You just funded her work. I was the one she really connected with. That hit a nerve, but I didn't show it. I simply smiled. Then I guess she connected with a liar because Nora's eggs were stored under legal custody. Mine. Every single vial was logged, sealed, and secured. You couldn't access them if you broke in with NASA clearance. He blinked, thrown off. What are you talking about? Nora worked in genetics, remember? You really think she didn't plan for psychos like you trying to hijack her legacy? The crowd murmured again. People were whispering like we were on an episode of The Real Housewives of DNA Fraud. Julian's voice cracked. You're bluffing. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough for everyone to hear. Try me, because if those files come out, it won't just expose your lie, it'll bury you legally. He swallowed hard. Tessa tugged his sleeve, whispering, Julian, let's go. But he yanked away, glaring at me with that desperate, broke man rage. This isn't over, he barked. No, I said, grinning. Oh, it's just getting funny. He stormed out, knocking over a stack of paper plates like some dramatic soap opera villain. The guests awkwardly clapped, not sure if the show was over or if there was an intermission. My mom walked up to me, smacked my arm, and hissed, Why must you always provoke him? Because it's easy, I said, and free entertainment. Later, as I was leaving, my father shuffled up beside me. You okay, son? I nodded. Yeah, I was just wondering how long it'll take Julian to Google how to fake DNA legally. Dad sighed. He's always been jealous of you. Jealousy I can handle, I said. It's stupidity that's contagious. As I drove home, I couldn't stop laughing. My late wife, Nora, the woman who'd once triple encrypted her grocery lists for fun, had somehow become the star of my brother's science fiction fantasy. And the best part? He had no idea she'd made me the sole legal guardian of her genetic material. Every egg, every document, every signature. Mine. So yeah, my brother thought he'd dropped a bombshell, but he didn't realize he'd just declared war with ammunition he didn't even own. And me? I'd already started plotting my counterattack. Because if Julian wanted to play games with Nora's legacy, he was about to learn something she used to tell me all the time. In genetics and revenge, control the sample. And I plan to. If you ever want to feel like an idiot surrounded by geniuses, try attending a biotech fundraiser while thinking CRISPR is a new kind of toaster. That's exactly how I met Nora. Picture this, a fancy ballroom in downtown Boston, champagne flowing like lies at a political rally, and me, Elias Bennett, venture capitalist extraordinaire, pretending I knew what a recombinant protein was. Spoiler alert, I didn't. I wasn't even supposed to be there. My firm had sponsored the event to network with rising scientific talent. Translation: find smart people to fund so we could look noble while counting profits. I showed up because my assistant threatened to resign if I skipped another donor event. It's a black tie affair, she'd said. You can't wear sneakers again. I wore loafers. Growth. Anyway, Nora was the keynote speaker that night, Dr. Nora Vale. Even her name sounded like an expensive perfume. She walked on stage in this simple navy dress, hair pinned up, glasses perched on her nose, like she owned both science and gravity. The crowd hushed. She started talking about gene editing, ethics, and the molecular responsibility of tomorrow's generation. I nodded along, pretending I understood a single syllable. But all I could think was, wow, she could explain rocket science and make it sound like poetry. After her talk, everyone swarmed her like bees at a sugar spill. I stood by the bar, drinking overpriced wine and Googling phrases like somatic cell nuclear transfer, so I wouldn't sound like a complete moron if she came over. Then she did. She actually walked up to me, smiled, and said, "You're Elias Bennett, right? The guy who invests in startups that end up on the news for all the wrong reasons." I nearly choked on my Cabernet. That's me. Reputation precedes me, huh?" She smirked. "I read one of your portfolio company's press releases last year, the one about algae-based milk." "Hey," I said, defensive, "it wasn't that bad. It exploded during testing," she said flatly. "Right, minor setback," I admitted. "We prefer to call it aggressive innovation." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that makes you forget every dumb thing you've ever said. "You know," she said, "you looked bored during my talk." "I wasn't bored," I lied. "Just mentally outmatched." Her eyes lit up with amusement. "So, you admit you didn't understand a thing?" "Completely. You lost me at mitochondria. That was in the first slide. Yeah, it's been a long night." That's when I said the dumbest, most honest thing that had ever come out of my mouth. DNA is basically the universe's Wi-Fi, right? It connects everything, but nobody knows the password. For a second, she just stared at me. Then she burst out laughing. Loud, unfiltered laughter that made a few serious scientists look up in horror. "That might be the best analogy I've ever heard," she said, shaking her head. "Utterly wrong, but somehow brilliant." We talked for an hour, or maybe 3, I lost track. She told me about her research, her frustrations with bureaucracy, and her dream of building a fertility technology company that wasn't just about profit, but about ethics and hope. I told her about my work in venture capital, my obsession with risk, and how I secretly thought spreadsheets were sexy. Don't judge me, math has curves too. By the end of the night, I knew 2 things. 1, I was completely smitten, and 2, I didn't understand 50% of what she'd said, but I wanted to. Our first official date was at a small Italian place downtown. She ordered spaghetti with marinara. I ordered the same thing because I was trying to impress her by mirroring her choices. Halfway through, she caught on. "You don't like pasta, do you?" I sighed. "Not when it's attacking me." I'd been fighting the noodles like a man at war. She smiled, grabbed a napkin, and said, "You're hopeless." "Completely," I said, but teachable. That became our dynamic. Nora taught, I learned, and sometimes I pretended I understood until she called me out. She was sharp but kind about it. Once, when I mixed up RNA and DNA in conversation, she said, "That's like confusing a photocopy for the original." Cute mistake, though. Then she kissed me. I started mixing them up more often after that. A year later, we got married in a small ceremony by the harbor. The wind nearly blew her veil into the water, but she laughed it off. "Science says wind resistance increases with surface area," she said. "So maybe I should dye it." "Don't you dare," I told her. "The wind's just jealous." Marriage with Nora was like living inside a think tank that smelled like coffee and sarcasm. She'd spend nights scribbling equations on napkins while I built financial models beside her. We'd argue about everything. Whether free will existed, whether pineapple belonged on pizza, whether her cat liked me, it didn't. But underneath it all was this current of mutual respect. She respected how I saw potential in chaos. I respected how she saw order in chaos. Together, we were unstoppable. Until the one thing we couldn't control happened. When the doctor told us she couldn't carry children, I thought he was kidding. He wasn't. Something about an autoimmune condition, elevated risks, and the kind of medical jargon that makes you feel both stupid and doomed. Nora handled it better than I did. She just nodded and asked clinical questions while I sat there, trying to remember how to breathe. That night, she sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping wine. "You don't have to stay with me," she said quietly. I nearly dropped my glass. "Excuse me? I know what you want, Elias. A family, a legacy. I can't give you that." I sat beside her and said, "Nora, you already did. You gave me a life worth showing up for." She stared at me for a long time, then whispered, "God, you're annoyingly good at comebacks." That's when she told me her plan. She wanted to preserve her eggs, and just in case science catches up, she said. I thought she meant it as a joke. Nope. 2 weeks later, she had an appointment. She filled out every form, signed every waiver, and handed me a folder titled Nora's Contingency Plan. I remember teasing her. "You make it sound like a corporate merger." "It is," she said, "between hope and logic." When the procedure was done, she came home with a smile so small it could have vanished in a blink. "It's weird," she said, "knowing part of me exists in a freezer." I kissed her forehead. "Better a freezer than a frat house." She laughed. "You're impossible." Years passed. Her company, Helixia, took off like a rocket. She built it on 3 principles: integrity, privacy, and control. "If anyone ever tries to mess with my genetics," she used to say, "they'll regret it." I thought it was a badass line. Turns out it was also a prophecy. We were the ultimate power couple. Money and science, suits and lab coats. Magazines called us the Bennett Vale Fusion. I framed that headline because it sounded like a Marvel movie. But success has a funny way of attracting parasites. My brother Julian was one of them. Julian and Nora never got along. She saw right through his fake charm and business pitches that involved influencer-driven kombucha or AI-powered dog collars. Once, at a family dinner, he asked her if she could clone his IQ. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "We don't replicate negative values." My dad nearly choked on his steak. Still, she never hated him. She pitied him, which somehow made Julian hate her more. He couldn't stand that she was smarter, richer, and harder to manipulate. And now, years later, he was using her memory to scam me out of my estate. I remember one night, just months before she died, Nora came home late from the lab. I was half asleep on the couch when she said, "Promise me something." "Depends," I mumbled. "Is it illegal?" "Not yet," she said with a grin. "Promise me you'll protect my work, no matter what happens." I nodded, not realizing how literal that promise would become. And now, here I am, watching her words turn into a chess game against my own brother. The irony? Nora probably saw it coming. She used to tell me, "Science is predictable, people aren't." She was right, she always was. Because somewhere between that fundraiser and her funeral, life decided to mix love, genius, and greed into one big cosmic petri dish. And while Julian was out there trying to rewrite biology for cash, I was preparing to honor the woman who wrote the original code. I didn't just meet Nora that night at the fundraiser. I met my purpose, and if my brother wanted to drag her name through his circus of stupidity, he was about to learn something I learned from her. Never challenge a scientist or her husband unless you're ready to become the experiment. If family trees came with a return policy, I'd have sent Julian back to the manufacturer years ago. My brother was the kind of guy who could fall face first into a fountain and somehow ask the water for a refund. We grew up under the same roof, same parents, same bedtime curfew. But while I learned to invest in stocks, he learned to invest in excuses. See, I'm the oldest, the overachiever, the one who believed hard work meant something. Julian, he believed hard work was what other people did when they couldn't fake charm. If laziness were a sport, he'd have an Olympic gold and a Wheaties endorsement. Our parents never noticed. Mom used to say, "Julian's just free-spirited." Translation: unemployed with great lighting. When we were kids, I was the quiet nerd building model rockets. He was the loudmouth stealing batteries from my rockets to power his Game Boy. By the time we hit adulthood, that pattern stuck. I built companies, he built debt. I learned about compound interest. He learned how to compound lies. But somehow Julian always managed to show up just when things were going right for me, like a bad sequel that nobody asked for. When Nora and I announced our engagement, he raised his glass and said, "To the perfect DNA combo." I should have known something was off then. He flirted with her research assistants during the toast, real smooth, like a raccoon breaking into a jewelry store. Nora laughed it off, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't trust him. She once whispered to me after a family dinner, "Your brother has the kind of smile you'd find in a crime documentary." I told her she was exaggerating. Turns out she was being generous. Julian's wife, Tessa, was another story. Sweet woman, all heart, zero radar. She thought my brother was creative. That's what she called it when he spent rent money on crypto opportunities. I tried to warn her. "Tessa, when Julian says he's investing in crypto, he means he's buying NFTs of cats wearing sunglasses." She said, "At least he's passionate." Passionate, sure. Passionate about failure. After Nora's funeral, Julian went full-on philosopher. "Death puts things in perspective," he said, sipping imported whiskey he didn't buy. "Makes you realize what really matters." Apparently, what really mattered was my bank account, because 3 months later, at his son's birthday, he turned a cake-cutting ceremony into a courtroom drama. But let's rewind a little, back before the birthday bombshell, so you can understand just how long this guy's been orbiting planet delusion. Julian had this pattern. Every time he was broke, which was most of the time, he'd find a business idea. The first one was a smoothie truck that only sold juice cleanses to dogs. The second was an app that connected people who felt the same vibe. Spoiler, no one downloaded it because the vibe was bankruptcy. Meanwhile, I was grinding. My firm, Apex Ventures, had just hit $1 billion valuation. I was on magazine covers, speaking at conferences, pretending I slept 8 hours a night. And yet, every time my phone buzzed, it was Julian asking for a small favor. Small favors that usually involved commas. When Nora and I married, we had a reception straight out of a lifestyle magazine. Crystal chandeliers, live jazz, the works. Julian showed up 45 minutes late, wearing aviator sunglasses and carrying a flask. He told my mother-in-law he was networking. Translation, hitting on her yoga instructor. At one point, he clinked his glass to toast us. "To Elias and Nora," he said. "May your genes create the next Einstein. Or at least someone better at math than me." Everyone laughed. Nora smirked politely. I just stared, wondering if public embarrassment was genetic. After that, our relationship entered the tolerated distance phase. I kept him close enough to monitor the damage, far enough to avoid it. He started a few more ventures. One was a coffee shop for gamers, another was a podcast where he interviewed visionaries who mostly owed him money. Each failed faster than his last apology. Then came Tessa's pregnancy. Julian treated it like a PR campaign. "This kid's gonna change everything," he told me over the phone. "A new era for the Bennetts." "An era of what?" I asked. "Child support?" "Haha," he said. "I mean, legacy, man. Family, love." I should have recorded that call. It would have made great evidence later. When Leo was born, I genuinely tried to be supportive. I sent flowers, gifts, even offered to set up a college fund. Julian refused. "Nah," he said. "My son's gonna be self-made." The baby was 2 weeks old and still drooling on himself, but sure, self-made. Then came the whispers, little hints that Julian was researching genetics. Tessa mentioned he'd been spending time in libraries, printing weird papers. That was already suspicious because Julian reading anything longer than a receipt was a miracle. A month before the party, he called me out of nowhere. "Hey, quick question," he said. "You still have Nora's stuff, right? Like her lab notes or whatever?" "Why?" I asked. "Oh, just curious. Thought I'd learn more about her work, in her honor." That was the first time I heard his innocent voice. It's the same tone toddlers use when they hide crayons in their noses. After that call, I told myself he was harmless. Grief makes people weird, right? Maybe he missed her too. But then my accountant mentioned something strange. Julian had applied for a line of credit using a potential inheritance claim. I didn't think much of it then. I wish I had. Tessa once confessed over coffee, "Julian's been acting strange lately. Keeps saying Destiny owes him something." "Tell Destiny to send an invoice," I said. "Maybe I'll pay it off." See, Julian wasn't just jealous of my success. He was addicted to my shadow. Every accomplishment I made was his new benchmark for failure. When Nora's company blew up, Forbes cover, multi-million buyout, he called me to say, "Congrats, bro. I always knew she'd make us proud. Us." The man had the audacity to take credit for proximity. But here's the thing about opportunists. They don't think they're villains. They think they're survivors. In his head, Julian probably believed he deserved compensation for emotional contributions. That's why when he stood at his kid's birthday party holding a wine glass like a mic and dropped that DNA bomb, I wasn't even shocked. I was just impressed by the consistency of his stupidity. He'd always been chasing shortcuts to success, and this time he thought he'd found a gold mine, literally buried in my wife's genetics. What he didn't realize was that Nora was 10 steps ahead of everyone, including me. She'd seen his type before, parasites with a family discount. After the party fiasco, I couldn't stop replaying our childhood. I remembered one summer when we both worked at Dad's auto shop. I fixed engines, Julian handled marketing, which meant he stood outside flirting with customers' wives. When Dad caught him, Julian said, "I'm improving customer engagement." Dad grounded him for a month. That's Julian, always selling garbage with confidence. Mom used to say, "You two will balance each other out someday." Yeah, if balance means one person's success tipping into the other's chaos. The worst part of me still loved him. You can't fully hate someone you've built pillow forts with, even if they later try to steal your dead wife's genetic material. That's the twisted curse of family. You keep hoping the next act will redeem them. After that birthday disaster, I avoided his calls. My phone would buzz with messages like, "You'll regret ignoring me," or "We can settle this amicably." My favorite was, "Let's keep this civil." Civil, from the guy who forged a DNA report on Canva. I finally called him back just to hear what kind of circus he was running. "Julian," I said, "you realize you can't fake science, right?" He laughed. "Everything's fake these days. Why not biology?" "Because biology bites back." "You think you're so untouchable," he said. "You always have. The perfect son, the successful husband. You think you're better." "No," I said. I know I'm better, but that's beside the point." He hung up on me. I stared at the phone, half expecting him to text something dumb like, "You'll see." He didn't. That silence was louder than his usual stupidity. It meant he was plotting. I called Margaret Steele, our family attorney, just to get ahead of whatever mess was brewing. She groaned when I explained. "He's still your brother?" she asked. "Unfortunately, yes. Family's like luggage. You never lose the old stuff. You just pay to store it." She said, "Keep receipts for everything. Opportunists love paper trails." And she was right. By then, Julian's claim had already reached my accountant and half the extended family. Cousins were texting condolences like I'd actually lost half my estate. My aunt even sent me a sympathy casserole. The cherry on top? He gave an interview to some local blog called Wealth and Legacy. The headline read, "Entrepreneur claims posthumous DNA connection to late scientist." The article had his photo with Leo in his arms, both wearing matching t-shirts that said #genetic miracle. I wish I were kidding. That's when I realized Julian didn't just want money. He wanted recognition. He wanted to be seen as part of Nora's brilliance. The man couldn't innovate, so he decided to appropriate. It wasn't greed, it was desperation wearing cologne. And honestly, that made it worse. Because you can fight greed with lawyers, but desperation? That's like punching fog. It just reforms around you. So I did what I always do when chaos hits. I planned. I went home, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, opened Nora's old encrypted drive, and whispered, "Okay, babe, let's remind him what genius really looks like." Because if Julian wanted a war, he'd picked the wrong battlefield. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about legacy. And I was ready to defend Nora's the only way I knew how, ruthlessly. There's no manual for funerals. Nobody tells you how to stand when your heart's been evicted from your chest, or what you're supposed to say when everyone lines up to tell you, "She's in a better place," like that's supposed to fix the hole she left behind. I remember standing by Nora's casket, numb and overdressed, shaking hands with people who couldn't even spell her name right on the sympathy cards. The day she died started like any other Tuesday, which apparently is the day the universe schedules its worst surprises on. I was in the middle of a meeting about a hotel chain investment when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then came the voice. "Mr. Bennett, there's been an accident." That's the kind of sentence that ends one life and starts another. The next thing I knew, I was standing in a hospital hallway that smelled like bleach and heartbreak, being told that my wife didn't make it. Drunk driver. Wrong turn. No justice, just silence. The kind that sticks to your skin. The funeral was a blur of flowers, pity, and small talk that felt like sandpaper. It was held at St. Augustine's, the same church where we'd said our vows. Ironic, right? Same aisle, different ending. The priest kept calling her Nora Vale Bennett, which somehow sounded more formal than she ever was. Nora hated titles. She used to joke, "If anyone calls me Dr. Vale in public, I'm leaving the room." I didn't cry during the service. Everyone expected me to, the grieving husband, stoic until the dam breaks. But my emotions were like a locked vault. I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, just a hollow ache, like I'd been unplugged. I shook hands, accepted condolences, even smiled for the newspaper photographer, because apparently grief is newsworthy if you're rich enough. Julian showed up late, of course. Sunglasses indoors, wearing a black turtleneck like he was auditioning for an art film. He walked straight to me, hugged me dramatically, and whispered, "She owed me a favor." I actually thought I misheard him. "What?" I asked. He just smirked and said, "Forget it. Long story." That should have been my first red flag, but grief makes you generous with stupidity. After the burial, we all went to the reception at my house. Well, our house, though. It felt like she'd taken the warmth with her. People brought casseroles, as if melted cheese could heal trauma. My mother kept refilling wine glasses. My father stood in a corner pretending to check sports scores while secretly wiping his eyes. My aunt, the family gossip, whispered, "She was too young. Such a shame." I wanted to scream, "Yeah, no kidding, Brenda," but I didn't. Then there was Julian, my brother, the opportunist, the family's PR nightmare in designer shoes. He sat near the piano, chatting up Nora's research partner, a tall woman named Dr. Emily Shea. Emily looked uncomfortable. You could tell she wasn't used to socializing with men whose IQ dropped 10 points per sentence. I overheard him say, "So, Nora mentioned you were working on a gene replication protocol. Sounds lucrative." Lucrative? At his sister-in-law's funeral. If there were a medal for tone deafness, he'd have two. Emily, bless her, shut him down cold. "We're not discussing research at a wake," she said sharply. Julian smiled like rejection was foreplay. Right, of course. I just admire her work, you know. She had passion. Passion doesn't pay rent, I muttered as I passed by. He pretended not to hear. The day after the funeral, the vultures circled. Lawyers, reporters, board members, everyone wanted to know what would happen to Nora's company, her research, her patents. She'd named me executor of her estate, which made me both the most wanted and most hated man in a 10-mile radius. I found myself spending long nights in her office, staring at her unfinished research notes. Her handwriting was still fresh on the pages. Equations, sketches, ideas, scribbled in the margins like she'd just stepped out for coffee. I'd run my fingers over the ink and whisper, "What were you planning, Nora?" Julian came by the house a week later, claiming he wanted to check on me. He brought takeout from her favorite Thai place, which was sweet until I had realized he'd eaten half of it on the way. "You shouldn't be alone," he said, flopping onto the couch. "Grief's a killer." "Thanks, Freud," I muttered. He looked around like he owned the place. "So, what happens to all her stuff now? Her company? Her lab equipment? Those fancy cryo things?" "They're secured," I said. "Why?" "No reason," he said too quickly. "Just curious, you know, family assets and all." Family assets, but I nearly choked on my noodles. I wanted to throw him out, but didn't. Maybe part of me still hoped he'd act like a brother for once. That lasted until he winked at me and said, "You think she'd have wanted you to keep it all?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Yeah, she left it in writing." He chuckled nervously, realizing he'd hit a wall. "Hey, no offense, man. Just saying, she and I had a good bond. She used to call me her favorite troublemaker." "Julian," I said. "She also called viruses troublemakers. You're in the same category." He laughed it off, but I saw the flash of irritation in his eyes. That was Julian. Too proud to apologize, too insecure to stop competing. A month later, I started noticing weird stuff. Anonymous emails. A few reporters asking about unverified claims tied to Nora's genetic research. Someone even called my office pretending to be from a fertility clinic. "We're just confirming the transfer of materials," the voice said. When I asked what materials, they hung up. That's when it clicked. Julian's favor comment, his obsession with Nora's work, his shady curiosity about cryo storage, it wasn't random. He was plotting something, but grief clouds your judgment. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just being his usual self, intrusive, greedy, clueless. Still, I started locking Nora's files in the study safe. I even changed the alarm code, which was originally her birthday. I replaced it with the date we met. I thought that would stop him. I was wrong. When Julian invited me to his son's simple backyard birthday, I figured it was an olive branch. A sign of peace. Maybe the man had grown some decency. Tessa texted me, "It'll be small, just family." I thought, sure, why not? I could use some air, some closure, maybe even a sense of normalcy. Instead, it was the setup of the century. Looking back, the clues were all there. The way he'd been dressing nicer lately, the smug grin every time I mentioned Nora's name, the quiet confidence of a man who'd found a new scam. But I ignored it, because I wanted to believe my brother wouldn't turn my wife's death into a financial opportunity. Spoiler, he would. The morning of the party, I found myself staring at Nora's wedding photo. She was smiling at me like she always did, like she could see straight through my sarcasm and into the chaos underneath. I remember whispering, "You'd laugh at all this, wouldn't you?" Because that's the thing about Nora. Even in death, she had a plan. She didn't just think 3 steps ahead, she thought 3 lifetimes ahead. Somewhere deep down, I knew she'd left breadcrumbs, clues that would eventually expose whatever Julian was cooking up. I just hadn't found them yet. At the funeral, I ignored the warning signs. At the reception, I laughed off his greed. By the time I realized what he was doing, it was too late for denial. The fallout had already started, whispers, gossip, and one very stupid brother about to detonate his own reputation. That's the thing about funerals. Everyone shows up to cry, but not everyone shows up for closure. Some show up for inheritance, some for secrets, and some, like Julian, for opportunity. But he didn't realize one thing. The woman he was trying to exploit had left me every tool I'd need to burn his lies to the ground. And I was done grieving. I was ready to start responding. You ever walk into a party and immediately know it's a setup? That's how I felt pulling up to Julian's backyard that Saturday. There were too many cars, too many decorations, and not nearly enough sanity. The invite said, "Small family gathering." What I saw looked like a low-budget royal wedding. Balloons everywhere, banners with "Happy First Birthday, Leo" in gold lettering, and a champagne bar. Because nothing says child-friendly like Prosecco at noon. Tessa greeted me at the gate, flustered but smiling. "Elias, you made it," she said, holding their baby on one hip while balancing a tray of cupcakes on the other. "Julian's just finishing something inside." "Finishing what?" I asked. She hesitated. "His speech." Speech. My internal alarm started blaring. No one gives a speech at a 1-year-old's birthday party unless they're about to ruin someone's life or run for office. I plastered on a polite smile. "Oh, great. Nothing says family bonding like a PowerPoint about baby milestones." I mingled a bit, translation, dodged conversations. My mother was there, bless her, wearing her church hat like she was ready to baptize the cake. My father hovered near the buffet, holding a bourbon like a security blanket. My cousin Ashley waved me over to gossip, but I wasn't in the mood. I grabbed a soda, stood near the fence, and watched the chaos unfold. Julian emerged 15 minutes later, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than his car payment. He had that smug grin plastered on his face, the one that usually precedes disaster. "Family," he announced, tapping a spoon against his wine glass. The chatter died down. Even the baby stopped crying, probably out of self-preservation. "I'd like to say a few words," Julian began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "First, thank you all for coming. It means the world to us to celebrate Leo's first birthday surrounded by family. But today isn't just about a child, it's about legacy." Legacy, oh no. Here we go. He kept going, milking every syllable like a TED Talk nobody asked for. "You all know my late sister-in-law, Nora," he said, placing a dramatic hand on his heart. "She was brilliant, compassionate, and dedicated to science, and in a way, she's still with us." The crowd murmured, confused. I took a long sip of my drink. Julian smiled wider. "Because her work lives on, in Leo." Silence. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. My father frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" Julian turned toward me, eyes gleaming. It means Nora's DNA was used to bring Leo into this world. She gave me and Tessa the most incredible gift, a piece of her legacy. Someone gasped. My mom dropped her rosary. I nearly choked on my soda. Excuse me? I said. Julian looked proud, like he'd just announced he cured cancer. It's true. Before she passed, Nora donated her eggs to help us conceive. So Leo isn't just my son, he's part of her too. It's fate. Fate, he actually said fate. Then, as if the idiocy wasn't enough, he reached into his blazer and pulled out a folder like a magician revealing a rabbit. I have proof. He held up color-printed pages like a teacher showing off a report card. Here's the DNA analysis. Leo's genetic markers are a 50% match with Nora's. Science doesn't lie. Oh, it absolutely can when you're the one holding the printer, I muttered. My mother clutched her chest. Julian, are you saying? Yes, he said dramatically. Leo is part of Nora's legacy, and by extension, Elias's estate. That means, in fairness, Leo deserves his share of what Nora left behind. And there it was. The motive, the greed, the pure stupidity wrapped in Hallmark-level theatrics. The crowd gasped. My dad muttered, "Oh, for God's sake." My cousin whispered, "Did he just turn a baby shower into an inheritance lawsuit?" Julian spread his arms like he'd just delivered the Sermon on the Mount. "This is about family, not money," he lied through his teeth. "But of course, considering the estate, 20 million if I'm not mistaken, it's only right that we handle this properly." That's when I laughed. Out loud. A full, uncontrollable, borderline, maniacal laugh that turned every head in the yard. "Oh, Julian," I said, wiping a tear. "You really went full soap opera with this, huh?" He frowned. "You think this is funny? I think it's all hilarious," I said. "You stand here at your kid's party claiming my dead wife donated her DNA to you like some kind of genetic fairy godmother, and you expect people to buy it?" He pointed at the papers. "It's science. It's Photoshop," I shot back. Tessa looked mortified. "Julian, maybe this isn't—" "Not now, Tessa," he snapped, cutting her off. "This is between brothers." "Brothers?" I said, stepping closer. "You stopped being my brother when you turned grief into a cash grab." The guests whispered like they were watching live TV. My mother whispered something in Latin again, probably an exorcism request. Julian raised his voice. "You're just scared, Elias. Scared the truth will come out." "The truth?" I said. "You wouldn't recognize the truth if it bit you on your overpriced cufflinks." He slammed the papers down on the cake table, smearing frosting across the fake DNA charts. "You're not taking this seriously." "Oh, I am," I said, grinning. "I just can't decide whether to call a lawyer or a psychiatrist." My father stepped forward, trying to mediate. "Julian, for once in your life, shut up before someone records this." Too late. Aunt Brenda already had her phone out, filming like she'd stumbled into a courtroom drama. Julian's face turned red. "This isn't over, Elias. You'll regret mocking me when the courts see this." "Courts?" I laughed again. "Buddy, you're about to get laughed out of the courthouse. Nora's lab used a private fertility firm with biometric locks. Guess whose face was the only authorized access? Mine." That shut him up for half a second. Then he tried doubling down. "She wanted me to have part of her legacy." I nodded. "Interesting legacy. Did she also want you to have my Range Rover?" Laughter erupted from the guests. Even my dad cracked a grin. Julian's lips trembled with rage. "You're gonna regret this." "No." Then, I said, stepping closer, lowering my voice. "You're the one who's gonna regret thinking you could rewrite science with a printer in a midlife crisis." Tessa looked ready to cry. She clutched the baby and whispered, "Julian, please, let's just stop." He yanked away. "You don't get it, Tessa. This is destiny." "Destiny," I said, shaking my head. "No, Julian, this is delusion. Destiny doesn't come with bad fonts and forged signatures." He grabbed his fake documents, frosting dripping off the corners, and stormed toward the gate. "You'll hear from my lawyer," he shouted. "Can't wait," I said. "I love comedy." The crowd dispersed awkwardly after that, and people avoided eye contact, whispering to each other like they'd just witnessed a car crash in slow motion. My mother came up to me, smacked my arm, and hissed, "Why do you always provoke him?" "Because it's so easy," I said. Dad patted me on the back. "You handled that better than I would have. I'd have shoved the cake down his throat." "Tempting," I said. glancing at the frosting-covered papers on the table. But I think humiliation's more satisfying. Fewer calories, too. Later that night, I replayed it all in my head, the speech, the forged papers. The audacity. Nora would have found it both infuriating and hilarious. I could almost hear her voice. He really tried to plagiarize my DNA? Bold. I sat in my study, opened her encrypted folder, the one labeled Plan B for betrayal, and found the contracts she'd left. Every genetic sample, every storage record, every transfer, all under my legal authority. She'd foreseen something like this. Of course she had. Nora didn't believe in trusting people. She trusted data. In that moment, I stopped laughing. Not because I was sad, but because I realized what came next. Julian hadn't just insulted me. He'd tried to stain Nora's name. And that, more than anything, I couldn't let slide. So I poured myself a drink, raised it toward her photo, and said, "Happy birthday to Leo, and happy reckoning to Julian." Because if my brother wanted to play scientist, I was about to turn his fake DNA drama into a real-life experiment in humiliation. The morning after Julian's disaster of a party, I woke up with a hangover. Emotional, not alcoholic. You know the kind. The one that makes you question not just your family, but evolution itself. I stared at the ceiling thinking, my brother just tried to claim partial ownership of my dead wife's DNA at a baby's birthday party. Somewhere in heaven, Nora was probably rolling her eyes so hard they triggered a solar eclipse. I shuffled to the kitchen, poured myself some coffee, and tried to shake off the mental image of Julian waving around that fake DNA report like he'd cracked the human genome. My phone buzzed with notifications, texts from relatives, screenshots of Facebook posts, and a voicemail from Aunt Brenda that began with, "Honey, don't be mad," and ended with her saying, "And the video already has 2,000 views." Perfect. My humiliation was trending. By noon, I'd had enough. I needed clarity, or caffeine strong enough to erase family trauma. That's when I remembered Nora's encrypted drive, the one labeled Plan B for betrayal. It had been sitting in our home office, untouched since her death. I'd always assumed it contained research backups or private data for her company. But after last night's circus, something told me Nora had predicted this. She always predicted everything. I went to the study, unlocked the drawer, and pulled out the sleek black drive. It looked harmless, like something that should contain vacation photos. But knowing Nora, it probably contained the digital equivalent of a nuclear launch code. I plugged it into my laptop. Immediately, it asked for a password. I tried the obvious ones first. Her birthday, our anniversary, the name of our cat, who hated me. No luck. Then I remembered something she'd said once when I asked why her passwords were so complicated. Because I don't trust humans, not even you. And you're my favorite one. So I typed, "Not even you." Click. It unlocked. A single folder appeared on the screen titled Plan B for betrayal. Inside were subfolders with names like contracts, legal, evidence, and one simply labeled Julian, predictable. I swear, I laughed so hard I almost spilled my coffee. Of course she made a Julian file, I muttered. Woman was clairvoyant. I opened it. There were surveillance logs, dates, time, even security footage thumbnails from her lab. Notes written in her tidy handwriting. March 18th. Julian stopped by the lab unannounced, asked suspicious questions about cryogenic storage, told him it's above his pay grade. He laughed. I didn't. April 2nd. Julian again. Asked if stored genetic material could be donated to family. I asked if he was starting a science project or a lawsuit. April 10th. Changed biometric security. Removed his visitor access. The last entry was the best. If Julian ever mentions DNA, tell Elias to pour himself a drink first. I actually did. I grabbed a bottle of Glenlivet and poured a double. Then I clicked open another folder labeled Legal Chain of Custody. It contained contracts, notarized documents, and video proof of every single step Nora had taken to secure her genetic materials. Everything from the initial fertility preservation consent forms to chain of custody logs signed by lawyers and lab directors. And there at the bottom was a video file titled Message to Elias. My throat went dry. I clicked it. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, Nora. Sitting in her lab coat, hair pulled into that same messy bun she always wore when she was deep in thought. Her face appeared tired but calm. "Hey you," she said, smiling faintly. "If you're watching this, it probably means I'm gone, and you're dealing with something ridiculous. I wish I could say I didn't see it coming, but come on, it's us. Drama follows the Bennetts like raccoons follow garbage." I laughed through the lump in my throat. God, I missed that voice. "I made this folder," she continued, "because I trust you, Elias. But I also know your brother, and while you're brilliant with numbers, you're terrible at spotting emotional manipulation. If someone ever tries to claim my DNA, show them the contract. Then show them the door." She leaned closer to the camera. "And if that someone happens to be Julian, oh, I'm sure it is, remind him I don't leave loose ends. Every egg, every sample, every vial is under your legal guardianship. No one, not even family, can access them without your written consent. The documentation's here. The rest, you'll figure out." She paused, smiled softly. "And Elias? Stop drinking straight from the bottle. Use a glass. You're not in college anymore." Then the video ended. I sat there staring at the frozen image of her smiling face, trying to breathe. For the first time in months, the ache in my chest felt a little lighter. She'd known, she'd planned. She'd even left me a manual for surviving my idiot brother. I opened the contracts folder next. The legal language was airtight. Nora had appointed me not just executor of her estate, but sole custodian of all biological assets, frozen eggs included. She'd also attached a clause specifying that any unauthorized claim to her genetic material would constitute biological fraud under federal law. I nearly toasted her photo right there. "You absolute genius," I whispered. But the surprises weren't over. In the Julian predictable folder, there was another subfolder titled Insurance. Inside it, email exchanges between Nora and her attorney, Margaret Steele, the same lawyer I'd been planning to call. The emails showed that Nora had already suspected Julian of snooping around her lab 6 months before her death. She'd filed a formal note about it with the company board. I scrolled through one particularly juicy thread, from Nora Vale to Margaret Steele, subject, family curiosity. Julian Bennett visited the lab again, asked if genetic material could be accessed for personal family reasons. He's fishing. I told him I'd only authorize one person in my will, Elias. Please file the necessary addendum to make that ironclad. Margaret had replied, "Understood. I'll ensure full legal custody is sealed under Elias's authority. Let's call this the anti-Julian clause." My wife and her lawyer literally named a legal safeguard after my brother's stupidity. That's love. I scrolled further, half laughing, half sobbing. The woman had prepared for every possible betrayal, except perhaps her own death. And even then, she'd managed to leave behind a posthumous mic drop. That afternoon, I called Margaret. She answered on the second ring, her voice as crisp as a new dollar bill. "Elias, I was expecting your call." "You knew," I said. "You and Nora both knew he'd try something." "I didn't know," she said calmly. "I just suspected. Your brother's the human version of an expired coupon. He shows up at inconvenient times and insists on being valid." I laughed. "Well, he outdid himself this time. Tried to forge a DNA report and claim Nora's eggs." "Of course he did," she said dryly. "And let me guess, at a public event? His kid's birthday party." There was a long pause. Then, God give me strength. I told her about the video message, the logs, the contracts, everything. She was silent for a moment before saying, "Elias, you're sitting on enough evidence to legally vaporize him. I'll file a cease and desist immediately. If he pushes further, we'll hit him with genetic fraud and defamation." "Music to my ears," I said. After we hung up, I poured another drink into a glass this time, because Nora said so, and sat back staring at the screen. The truth was right there. All of it. Proof, paperwork, protection. But what hit me hardest wasn't the evidence. It was how well she'd known me. She'd left no emotional note, no "I miss you" or "keep living." Just clear strategic instruction. Because she knew that's what I'd need to survive: purpose. A reason to stop drowning in grief and start fighting again. By evening, I'd printed copies of everything, contracts, logs, timestamps, and locked them in a fireproof safe. Then I sat at Nora's desk, staring at her old microscope. I placed my hand on the cool metal and whispered, "You outsmarted everyone again." The office was quiet, save for the soft hum of her old equipment. But for the first time since her death, the silence didn't hurt. It felt grounding, like she was still orchestrating from behind the scenes. I checked my phone. No new messages from Julian, which meant one of two things. He was either hiding or cooking up another round of stupidity. Either way, I was ready. Because now I had everything. The receipts, the signatures, the literal video testimony from beyond the grave. Julian had declared war with a fake PDF. I was about to end it with a legally notarized nuclear bomb. When people say, family drama builds character, I assume they mean it builds criminal records. Because after that birthday fiasco, I wasn't just irritated, I was motivated. The kind of motivated that makes you clean your email inbox and hire private investigators. First thing Monday morning, I called Margaret Steele, the family attorney who scared even judges into good posture. She picked up with her usual no-nonsense tone. "Elias Bennett, I assume you're calling because your brother discovered the internet." "Worse," I said. "He discovered Microsoft Word and thinks he's a geneticist." She sighed. "God help us. Tell me everything." I explained the whole circus, the speech, the forged DNA, the frosting-covered evidence. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Your brother's not just stupid, he's ambitious about it. We'll need proof he fabricated those documents." "Oh, don't worry," I said. "I have something better than proof. I have Nora's digital receipts." She paused. "You opened the drive?" "Yup. Plan B for betrayal. Turns out my wife posthumously dunked on Julian from beyond the grave." Margaret actually chuckled. I always liked that woman. Then she got serious. "You'll need someone to gather corroborating evidence, records, witnesses, anything that ties him to a fraud attempt. I'll recommend a guy, Frank Delaney, private investigator, ex-cop, 0 patience, probably allergic to stupidity. He's perfect." She gave me his number, and 2 hours later, Frank walked into my office. The man looked like a linebacker who'd been built entirely out of sarcasm. Grizzled beard, black leather jacket, a face that said, "I've seen things," and eyes that said, and most of them were dumb. He didn't shake my hand right away. He just looked me over and said, "So, you're the guy with the genius wife and the idiot brother?" "That's me," I said. A genetic coin toss gone wrong." He nodded, sat down, and pulled out a notebook. "All right, tell me what flavor of stupid we're dealing with." I gave him the highlights reel. Julian's fake DNA stunt, his obsession with Nora's research, his financial issues. Halfway through, Frank held up a hand. "Wait, did you just say he announced this fraud at a children's birthday party?" "Yep." Frank blinked. "You're paying me to investigate a man who's self-incriminated between slices of cake?" "Pretty much," he smirked. "This'll be fun." For the next hour, we went through everything. Nora's files, the video message, the contracts, even the timestamps of Julian's previous visits to her lab. Frank scribbled notes like he was writing a detective novel. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Let me guess, he's broke?" "Broke is generous," I said. "He's allergic to employment. The only thing he's invested in is debt." Frank grunted. "Then this isn't about family or grief. It's about money. And people who are desperate for money do stupid things." "Like commit genetic fraud," I said. "Exactly. I'll dig into his finances, see where he's been sniffing around. Give me 72 hours. I nodded. "Take your time. I've waited 3 months for peace. I can wait 3 days for revenge." The next 3 days felt like watching the world's slowest fireworks show. I tried focusing on work, but every email from Margaret made my blood pressure spike. Meanwhile, the gossip wildfire kept spreading. My mother called every morning to say, "Elias, can't you two make peace? He's still your brother." "Mom," and I said, "He forged a DNA report." She paused. "Still family. By that logic, Charles Manson's family too. Don't be dramatic. I'm being generous." By day 3, Frank called. "Got some stuff, you home?" "Yeah, come by." He arrived with a manila folder thicker than a college textbook and the grin of someone who'd found gold in a landfill. "Your brother," he said, dropping the folder on my desk, "is what we in law enforcement call a buffet of bad decisions." I opened it. Inside were credit reports, debt summaries, screenshots of online activity, and most importantly, an email chain. This, Frank said, tapping the pages, is where it gets fun. He's in debt to 3 credit card companies, owes rent on his so-called business office, and my favorite part, he's been emailing a guy named Snake about document verification services. I raised an eyebrow. Snake? Yeah, I checked. Snake runs a fake certificate business out of Florida. He's got Yelp reviews. Of course he does. Frank flipped to another page. Your brother paid Snake $800 for a DNA report template package. I nearly spit my coffee. He bought a paternity scam kit? Yep, from Pinterest, no less. That's where the template originated. Pinterest? I said, laughing. So, my brother committed fraud with arts and crafts software? Basically. I leaned back in my chair. You're telling me the man tried to rob me using the same platform suburban moms use to plan baby showers? Correct. I laughed so hard my ribs hurt. Frank, you just made my week. He shrugged. I'm not done. I also checked his phone records. He's been calling a fertility clinic in the next county, pretending to be you, trying to confirm access to stored genetic materials. My laughter died instantly. He what? Relax, they didn't buy it. The clerk he spoke to said he sounded like a man reading a script from a soap opera. They flagged the call. I exhaled. Well, at least someone in that clinic has common sense. Frank handed me a USB drive. All recordings, transcripts, and screenshots. And don't worry, I've already sent copies to your lawyer. That's your insurance policy. I stared at the folder. It was beautiful. The paper smelled like justice. Frank, I said, you're a saint. He grunted. More like a janitor. I just clean up other people's messes. Then he stood. You want my professional advice? Wait, don't confront him yet. Let him dig deeper. Desperate people always do. And when he's waist deep, that's when you pull the plug. I smirked. So, basically, let him hang himself. Exactly. I like your style. After he left, I poured myself a drink and sat at Nora's desk, staring at the stack of evidence. Part of me wanted to drive straight to Julian's house and shove the folder in his face. But another part, the smarter, colder part, wanted to play the long game. Nora used to say, patience is just revenge in slow motion. The next day, I met with Margaret. She reviewed the evidence with a look that could curdle milk. He forged medical documents, she said, impersonated you to a clinic, and publicly defamed Nora's name. That's a trifecta of idiocy. Impressive, right? I said. I'll draft the legal notice. We'll give him a chance to withdraw his claim before we take it to court. If he refuses, we'll bury him under so many legal fees, he'll wish he'd studied biology. Sounds poetic, she smiled faintly. I learned from your wife. By the weekend, the cease and desist letter was ready. I emailed Julian a copy with the subject line, "Stop before you embarrass yourself further." 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was him. He didn't even say hello. What the hell is this? It's your early retirement notice, I said. You hired a private investigator? Technically, Margaret did, but yes. And he found enough dirt to start a compost business. You think you can scare me with paperwork? No, I said cheerfully. I'm planning to scare you with facts. There was a pause, followed by his favorite tactic, guilt. You're really going to drag your own brother through court? Julian, you dragged yourself through stupidity. I'm just here to narrate. You're heartless. Correct. But at least I'm solvent. He hung up. I smiled, set my phone down, and whispered, Round 1, me. 2 days later, Frank texted again. He's panicking. Tried to sell the exclusive story to a blog for $5,000. Got rejected. Blog said his evidence looked fake. I replied, tell them to offer him $50 for the comedy rights. Frank sent a thumbs up emoji, which, coming from a man like him, was practically a standing ovation. That night, I drove by Nora's memorial garden. The moonlight reflected off the plaque that read, Science is truth. Truth always wins. I knelt down, placed a hand on the stone, and said, You were right again, babe. Even from the grave, you're teaching lessons. Because here's the thing. I wasn't just fighting for money or reputation. I was fighting for her legacy. For the brilliance that people like Julian tried to exploit. Because they could never build anything of their own. Frank called again the next morning. Final update, he said. Your brother's account balance is negative. He's maxed every card, owes rent, and Snake The fake document guy is demanding payment. Snake wants his money, I said. You can't make this up. Frank chuckled. I'd almost feel bad for him if he weren't so dumb. Almost. Almost, he agreed. So what now? Now, I said. Now we set the stage. Because Julian thought this was a family squabble, but it wasn't. It was an education. And the first lesson? Never pick a fight with someone who has both the receipts and the moral high ground. As I hung up, I poured myself a coffee and looked out the window at the city skyline. The world kept turning, business kept booming, but for the first time since Nora's death, I felt something close to peace. Not because the war was over, but because I was finally enjoying it. Julian wanted a legacy. He'd get one, as the cautionary tale at the end of my victory speech. There's something liberating about knowing you're walking into a trap you designed yourself. That was me the night I invited Julian over for what he thought was a private talk. He called earlier that morning, voice trembling, tone full of fake humility, and said, "Bro, can't we just settle this without lawyers?" Ah, yes, the international language of people about to lose everything. Sure, I told him. Come by tonight. We'll keep it between us. He hesitated, but like he couldn't believe I just agreed. You serious? As a tax audit, I said. After I hung up, I called Margaret. He's taking the bait, I told her. Good, she said. Keep it civil, but record everything. And please, Elias, no physical altercations. Margaret, I said, I'm not going to hit him. Then what are you going to do? Educate him? She sighed like a woman who'd dealt with one too many Bennetts. Just don't enjoy it too much. By 7 p.m., I had the house prepped like a courtroom. Lights dimmed, documents organized, recorder on, whiskey poured, for me, not him. I even set out 2 glasses to make it look friendly, because nothing says let's talk like expensive liquor and looming revenge. Julian showed up fashionably late, wearing his best cologne, the kind that tries too hard to smell like money. He stepped in, flashing that nervous grin. Hey man, you look good. Holding up okay? I smiled. Surprisingly well, considering my brother tried to commit science fraud at a birthday party. He laughed awkwardly. Come on, don't start. I came here to make peace. Peace? I said, pouring whiskey into both glasses. Julian, you've been texting every relative we have, telling them my wife left you her DNA and her will. That's not peace. That's insanity with stationery. He waved a hand. Okay, maybe I exaggerated, but I was grieving. People do weird things when they're hurting. Like buying a fake DNA report from a man named Snake, I said. He froze mid-sip. What? I leaned back. Frank told me everything. Pinterest template, Florida email address. The works. His face drained. You hired someone to spy on me? I hired someone to document your stupidity, yes. He tried to recover. All right, fine, I made a mistake. But maybe the results weren't fake. Maybe they were just inconclusive. Inconclusive? I repeated. Julian, the only thing inconclusive about this situation is whether you're dumb or desperate. Possibly both. He slammed his glass down. You can't talk to me like that. I'm your brother. And you can't forge federal medical records, I shot back. But look at us both breaking traditions. He took a deep breath, probably to find some dignity, but dignity had left him 3 crimes ago. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said finally. I needed help, Elias. I'm drowning. I tilted my head. So you decided to steal from the lifeguard? His voice cracked. You've always had everything. Money, success, Nora. I thought maybe for once, something good could come my way too. By stealing her legacy, I said, that's not something good, Julian. That's emotional embezzlement. He sat down heavily, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I didn't think you'd find out this fast. Oh, you mean the part where you announced it on camera at a public event? Yeah, you really nailed stealth mode. He covered his face with his hands. I messed up. Big time, I said. And here's the thing. You didn't just mess with me. You dragged Nora's name into your con. He dropped his hands, eyes glossy. You think I don't miss her too? No, I said calmly. I think you miss the access her genius gave you. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air was heavy, thick with tension and 12-year-old scotch. I took a slow sip, then reached for the folder beside me. Let me make something clear, I said. I could destroy you right now. Legally, publicly, socially. You'd be trending under #brother from hell before breakfast. He flinched. You wouldn't do that. Oh, I absolutely would, I said, smiling. But lucky for you, I'm not here for blood. I'm here for truth. I slid the folder across the table. Inside were Nora's lab contracts, biometric records, and the video message she left. I hit play. Nora's face filled the screen, calm and beautiful as ever. If someone claims my DNA, she said in that firm, no-nonsense tone, show them the contract, and then show them the door. Julian's eyes went wide. Is that— Yes, I said. The woman you tried to impersonate, addressing you from beyond the grave. He swallowed hard. This could be fake, I smiled. Funny. That's exactly what your DNA report was. He blinked rapidly, eyes darting from the papers to me. You set this up. No, genius. She set it up. Years ago, she predicted this exact stunt. She even had a folder named after you. Julian, predictable. He paled. She hated me. She didn't hate you, I said softly. She just understood you, which honestly is worse. He looked like a man watching his life implode in slow motion. You're really going to press charges? I don't have to, I said. You're already a walking confession. He sank back into the chair, defeated. So what now? Now, I said, standing, you're going to retract your little DNA fairy tale. You're going to call every person you've told, post a public apology, and thank Nora for not haunting you personally. He rubbed his temples. You're serious. As a funeral. He stared at the floor, voice small. And if I don't? Then Margaret files for fraud, defamation, and impersonation of a licensed genetic custodian. He blinked. That's a thing? It is now, I said. And guess what? The statute's on my side. He sighed, defeated. You're enjoying this. A little, I admitted. But mostly, I'm just tired. Tired of bailing you out. Tired of pretending you're the free spirit and not the hurricane that hits every 3 years. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, barely audible, he said, I didn't mean to hurt you. I exhaled. You did, Julian. But that's not even the worst part. You disrespected her. And that, I pointed to Nora's photo on the mantel, is unforgivable. He nodded slowly, eyes red. I'll fix it. I know you will, I said, because Margaret's going to write your apology for you. You'll sign it, read it, and maybe, just maybe, you'll learn what accountability tastes like. He looked up. Can't we just handle this privately? Oh, we are, I said. This is as private as it gets. I could have invited CNN. He grimaced. You're cruel. No, Julian, I said evenly. I'm efficient. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark city skyline. You know what's funny? Nora used to say you were harmless, that you'd never go through with anything dangerous because you were too lazy. Guess she underestimated how much trouble laziness could cause. When I turned around, Julian was staring at the video still of Nora's face, frozen mid-smile. She was so smart, he murmured. Yeah, I said, and she chose to marry me. That should tell you exactly how far out of your league you are. He looked like he wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to say. I poured him another glass of whiskey, not out of kindness, but because watching him drink defeat was poetic. After a few minutes of silence, he stood. I'll make it right. You'll try, I corrected, and that's better than usual. He hesitated at the door. You think she'd forgive me? I shrugged. Nora believed in evolution, so maybe if you evolve into a better man. He nodded, opened the door, and left. The moment the door shut, I exhaled and turned off the recorder. And that, I said to the empty room, is how you domesticate a scandal. I sent the audio to Margaret with a short message. He folded. File it for the archives. She replied instantly. Good. If he backtracks, we go nuclear. I leaned back in my chair and stared at Nora's picture again. You see that, babe? I whispered. You outsmarted him from beyond the grave. I just played the assistant. Her smile in that photo looked almost amused, as if she'd known all along that this would happen, and that I'd be sitting here with the satisfaction of poetic justice. Outside, the night was quiet, peaceful even. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Not because it was over, but because I'd finally taken control. Julian had come in a liar and left a lesson. And maybe, just maybe, I could start moving forward. Not with revenge, but with resolution. still. I poured one last drink, lifted it toward her photo, and said, "To you, Nora, the genius who saw through everyone, even me. You warned me about human stupidity, and you were right, again." Then I smirked. "Oh, and don't worry, I'm billing him for the whiskey." If there's one thing worse than a family dinner, it's a family dinner after you've legally annihilated your brother's dignity. Mom called it a chance for healing. I called it emotional Russian roulette with dessert. She'd insisted. "Elias, I want both my boys under one roof again. No lawyers, no shouting, just family." "Mom, last time we were under one roof, Julian tried to auction my wife's DNA. Then this time will be better. How? I'm bringing pie." So naturally I said yes, because saying no to my mother is like arguing with gravity. It never ends well. By Saturday evening, I was driving to my parents' house with a stomach full of dread and a peace offering of Cabernet. I could already smell Mom's Sunday roast through the door, her way of weaponizing comfort food. My dad answered wearing his "good Lord, not again" face and whispered, "Your brother's here. He brought flowers." "For you or for his legal defense?" I asked. "Maybe both." The dining room looked like a Hallmark commercial. Candles, crystal glasses, and that old family photo of us as kids grinning like idiots. The only difference now was that back then, one of us hadn't tried to impersonate a fertility clinic. Julian stood at the table, clutching a bouquet of roses like they were an apology in floral form. He looked awful, tired, pale, the kind of face you get when karma stops whispering and starts throwing punches. "Elias," he said quietly, "thanks for coming." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, taking a seat opposite him. I needed a reminder of what disappointment looks like in person. Mom shot me a warning look. "Boys, tonight is about peace." "Sure, Ush," I said. "Let's eat peace." We sat down. The table was awkwardly silent, except for the clinking of silverware. Dad kept refilling his bourbon. Mom kept talking about meaningless things, her new neighbor, the church raffle, the weather, like small talk could cover up a family crime scene. Then she said it. "Julian has something to share." Of course he did. Julian cleared his throat. I want to apologize. To everyone. Especially you, Elias." I raised an eyebrow. Apologize or plea bargain? He swallowed. "Both, I guess. I was wrong. The DNA stuff, it was fake. All of it." I lied. The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. "You lied?" He nodded. "Yeah, I got desperate. I made things up. I was jealous of him, of Nora, of everything." Dad muttered, "Well, no shock there." Julian looked at me. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to make it right." I leaned back. "You can start by refunding the emotional damage." He forced a weak smile. "If I could afford that, we wouldn't be here." I almost laughed. At least he still had jokes. Mom sniffled. "I'm proud of you for admitting it." I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, Mom. Next we'll give him a trophy for not robbing a bank." Julian sighed. "I deserve that." "Yes," I said. "And more." He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for you." I frowned. "What is it, another forged document?" He shook his head. "No, it's a letter. Nora wrote it. I found it in my house after the funeral. She must have given it to Tessa for safekeeping." I froze. My throat went dry. "A letter from Nora?" He nodded. "I didn't read it. I swear." For once, I believed him. He slid the envelope across the table like it was made of glass. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was her handwriting, looped, confident, familiar. The scent of her perfume still faintly clung to the paper. Dad cleared his throat. "Go on, son. Read it." I opened it. "Elias, if you're reading this, I probably left this world before you were ready. I'm sorry, I never wanted to leave you with chaos, but you married into a circus. You'll be fine. If Julian's involved in this moment, I'm guessing he's done something stupid. Be kind after you win. You always do. I love you. Keep building, keep laughing, and for the love of God, stop skipping breakfast. You turn into a gremlin when you don't eat. P.S. I set aside a donation fund in your name. Use it for something that matters, maybe a scholarship or therapy for your brother, your call." Nora. My eyes blurred halfway through. I heard Mom sniffing, Dad clearing his throat again. Julian sat perfectly still, guilt written all over him. I folded the letter carefully, placed it on the table, and said, "She really thought of everything." Julian nodded. "She was incredible." "She was," I said softly, then louder. "Which is why it pissed me off so much when you dragged her name through the mud." "I know," he said. "I deserve everything you throw at me." "Oh, don't tempt me," I said. "I have good aim." But my anger was cooling, maybe from exhaustion, maybe from that letter. Nora had always been better at forgiveness than I was, and maybe just this once, I could try to meet her halfway. "Julian," I said finally, "you embarrassed the family, you humiliated yourself, and you almost turned grief into a circus act. But at least you're man enough to admit it now. That's something." He looked up. "So you forgive me?" I sighed. "Forgive is a strong word. Let's start with, I won't ruin your life further." He smiled weakly. "I'll take it." Mom reached across the table and held both our hands like some low-budget therapist. "See? Family always finds its way back." Dad muttered, usually through traffic and bad decisions. We actually laughed. For a moment, it almost felt normal again, almost. Then I cleared my throat. "Actually, I have something to share too." Julian groaned. "Oh no." "Relax," I said. "No PowerPoints." I pulled out an envelope of my own. "Since you're now embracing accountability, I thought you'd appreciate this." He looked wary. "What is it?" "A donation confirmation," I said, sliding it toward him. "In Nora's name. I donated $100,000 to a fertility foundation that helps women pay for treatments, legally, ethically, and without needing a criminal record." His jaw dropped. "You did what?" "I figured since you're so fascinated by genetics, we'd redirect that energy to something useful." Mom clapped. "Oh, Elias, that's wonderful." Dad smirked. "Poetic, too." Julian just sat there, blinking. "You really love rubbing it in, huh?" "It's not rubbing it in," I said. "It's public service." He groaned, but even he couldn't argue. "Fine. You win again." "Correction," I said. "Nora wins. I just handle her posthumous Pia." Dinner eased up after that. We even managed small talk, sports, business, how Dad still refuses to get Wi-Fi because the old internet worked fine. For the first time in forever, the tension cracked enough to let laughter in. As we cleared the table, Julian approached me near the kitchen. "Hey," he said quietly, "thanks for not destroying me." I looked at him, tired but sincere. "Don't thank me yet. You still owe Mom an apology for making her pray in Latin last month." He chuckled. "Yeah, she's been texting me Bible verses. Consider it free therapy." He smiled awkwardly, then extended his hand. "Truce?" I hesitated, then shook it. "Temporary. Don't test the renewal terms." "Fair enough," he said. Mom hugged us both, teary-eyed. "My boys are back." Dad raised his glass. "To survival." I corrected him. "To Nora. The only reason this family still has functioning neurons." We all toasted, clinked glasses, and for a brief, miraculous second, everything felt okay. Maybe not healed, but patched up enough to keep going. Later that night, as I drove home, I kept replaying her letter in my head. Be kind after you win. Trust Nora to turn revenge into philosophy. I parked, walked into the house, and sat in her old study. Her photo smiled at me from the desk. I lifted my glass to her again and said, "You'd be proud, babe." He finally admitted he's an idiot. Took 9 months and a cease and desist, but progress is progress. The house was quiet, but I could almost hear her laugh echoing through the walls. For once, it didn't hurt. It felt right. Family's a mess. Always will be. But maybe that's the point. You survive the madness, find the humor, and keep the legacy alive. And as far as I was concerned, Nora's legacy was finally back where it belonged. Safe, honored, and out of Julian's hands forever. It's strange, the sound of peace. It doesn't arrive like a fanfare. It sneaks up quietly, like that moment you realize the phone isn't ringing anymore, and no one's asking for money or forgiveness or both. A year had passed since Julian's grand DNA heist, as the tabloids had called it. Thanks to Aunt Brenda selling the story to a gossip blog for a free cruise ticket, She claimed it was for awareness. Sure, Brenda, awareness in a Caribbean balcony suite. But somehow, the chaos had burned itself out. Julian had gone silent, which was his most impressive achievement yet. No emails, no late-night rants, no philosophical texts about forgiveness and family bonds. It was like karma finally muted him. Then again, it kind of had. After his very public apology, ghostwritten by Margaret, edited by me, and approved by Nora's foundation, Julian tried to go into self-reinvention mode. The man started posting motivational quotes on LinkedIn. I wish I were kidding. Failure is fertilizer. He wrote once, grow from it. Someone commented, bro, you forged a DNA test. Even better, he'd started teaching integrity seminars for small businesses. Integrity. The same man who used Microsoft Paint to fake paternity proof was now preaching honesty for $50 a ticket. Irony didn't just die, it filed for bankruptcy. Meanwhile, I'd moved on. I'd launched the Nora Foundation for Genetic Integrity, a nonprofit dedicated to ethical fertility research and education. Fancy name, simple mission. Make sure no one ever tries to pull what Julian did again. We even had a slogan, truth can't be forged. Nora would have loved that. She always said branding was science's secret weapon. The foundation had grown faster than I expected. Universities wanted partnerships, biotech companies wanted grants, and people, real people, sent letters about how Nora's legacy inspired them. I kept one of those letters on my desk from a single mother in Oregon who'd received fertility treatment through our funding. She wrote, because of Nora, my daughter exists. That one line was worth more than the millions I'd lost and gained over the years. But there were still ghosts. The kind you don't see, just feel. Some mornings, I'd wake up and expect to hear Nora humming in the kitchen or swearing at her coffee maker for being emotionally unstable. She had this way of turning ordinary moments into proof of life. And even now, I swear the air in her study still smelled faintly like her perfume. Something floral, expensive, and scientifically intimidating. So yeah, I'd been okay. Functioning, even dating again, if you could call 3 awkward dinners and a panic attack dating. But peace for me wasn't about romance. It was about stability, the kind that didn't depend on someone else's chaos. That's why when I got the text from Julian one quiet afternoon, my first instinct was to throw my phone into a river. It read, coffee? That's it, no explanation. Just caffeine and question marks. I ignored it. 10 minutes later, another came through. Promise I won't mention DNA. I laughed so hard I snorted my coffee. That's new, I thought. The man was learning self-awareness, one baby step at a time. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at this small cafe downtown, the kind with reclaimed wood tables and overpriced muffins. Julian was already there, looking shockingly decent. No sunglasses indoors, no flashy watch. Just jeans, a button-up, and the kind of humility you only get from being legally embarrassed on the internet. Elias, he said, standing to shake my hand. Thanks for coming. I figured it was either coffee or a subpoena, I said. This seemed cheaper. He smiled faintly. I deserve that. We sat. The waitress came by and he ordered black coffee. No triple caramel nonsense this time. I ordered the same, mostly out of curiosity to see if it'd kill him. So, I said, leaning back, you wanted to talk? Yeah, he said. I wanted to say thank you. I nearly choked. Sorry, what? For not destroying me when you could have, he said. For letting me apologize. For not being like me. I studied him for a moment. You trying to make me cry or sell me something? He laughed softly. Neither. I had to hit rock bottom to realize what I became. Julian, I said, you didn't hit rock bottom. You hosted a barbecue there. He smirked. Fair, but I've changed. I arched an eyebrow. That's what people say right before pyramid schemes. No, really, he said. After everything, I started seeing a therapist. Been sober 6 months, got a part-time job teaching financial literacy. I blinked. Financial literacy? He nodded. At a community center for teens. Does it include a chapter on what not to do? Funny, he said, but they love those stories. For once, I believed him. There was something in his tone, an unfamiliar steadiness. Maybe life had finally taught him the lesson I never could. He reached into his bag and pulled out a check. This is for the foundation. I froze. What's this? My way of giving back, he said. $10,000. It's not much, but I held up a hand. Julian, is this stolen? He laughed. No. Earned. I saved up. It's from the seminars. Oh, the irony of using integrity money for charity. He shrugged. Poetic, right? I took the check, staring at his name, scrawled in messy ink. You know, Nora would have laughed her head off seeing this. Yeah, he said, smiling faintly. She probably would have called it behavioral evolution. I nodded slowly. She would have said, see, Elias? Even bad DNA mutates into something useful. He chuckled. Exactly. For the first time in years, our laughter wasn't laced with bitterness. It was genuine. Strange, but freeing. After coffee, we walked outside. The sky was clear. The kind of blue Nora used to compare to a chemical reaction done right. I tucked the check into my pocket. You really are trying, huh? I am, he said. Still screw up, but at least now I notice. Progress. Progress, he agreed. We shook hands again, this time without sarcasm. And when he walked away, I didn't feel anger anymore, just closure. Later that evening, I visited Nora's memorial garden behind the house. It was sunset, and the flowers she'd planted had exploded into color. Lavender, lilies, and those weird hybrid roses she'd engineered that somehow smelled like cinnamon. She'd called them controlled miracles. I sat on the bench by her plaque, the one engraved with her favorite quote, "Truth, like DNA, always replicates." I did it, babe, I said quietly. The foundation's thriving. Your name's everywhere. And your brother finally stopped being a walking lawsuit. A soft wind rustled through the garden, brushing the petals. It almost felt like she was answering. You'd like this part, I continued. Julian's teaching kids about honesty. He even donated to the foundation, which means somewhere, the universe is short-circuiting. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the foundation's latest social post. It was a photo of a new lab being built in her name, the Vail Center for Genetic Integrity. Seeing her name in bold letters still hit me like a punch wrapped in pride. I looked at her photo again, smiled at and whispered, "You were right as usual. Truth won." And yeah, I finally stopped drinking straight from the bottle. A soft laugh escaped me, half joy, half ache. Because that's the thing about grief. It never really leaves. It just gets quieter until all that's left is the laughter you share with the memory. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed again. A text from Julian. Just got approved for a full-time position. Also, I found one of Mom's old lasagna recipes. Guess I'm evolving. I chuckled and typed back, "Congratulations, don't clone the lasagna." Then I slipped my phone away and looked at the fading sky. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was honest again. And in a world full of forgeries, that was enough. I turned to Nora's plaque one last time. You know, they say laughter heals, but in your case, I think it haunts. Because every time I start taking life too seriously, I can still hear you laughing. I smiled, and that's how I know I'm doing something right. As I walked back toward the house, the garden lights flicked on, casting a warm glow over the flowers. The sound of the evening breeze mixed with faint city noise. Life going on, imperfect but steady. I stopped at the door, looked back once more, and said softly, "Rest easy, Nora." The experiment worked. Even Julian's human now. Then I laughed. The kind of laugh that doesn't hurt anymore. The kind that means the chapter's finally over.